There are moments when everything inside you feels like it has reached its limit. You pray, but there is no immediate answer. You speak to God, but all you receive is silence. And slowly, a dangerous thought begins to form in your mind. Maybe nothing is happening. Maybe no one is listening. But what if everything you believe about silence is wrong? What if the very moment you decided to pray was already the moment heaven responded? Because there is a reality most people never understand. Divine response does not begin when you see the result. It begins when your intention reaches beyond your words. Before anything changes around you, something has already shifted beyond your perception. And this is where your journey begins today. Not in the visible world, but in the unseen dimension, where every tear has meaning and every silent prayer has movement. Stay with this message, because what you are about to understand will change the way you interpret waiting, delay, and even suffering. Nothing you have prayed for is lost in the void. Nothing has been ignored. There is a deeper process unfolding, and it started the moment you first called out in faith. Now let this truth settle in your spirit as we go deeper. The invisible instant when your prayer has already been heard. There is a moment so subtle that the human mind cannot register it, yet it is more real than anything you can see. It is the instant your prayer is received in the spiritual dimension. You think prayer is a conversation that travels upward and waits for approval. But in truth, prayer is connection the moment it is formed. The distance you feel does not exist where God operates. What feels like delay is only the unfolding of something already acknowledged. In that invisible instant, your fear is already seen. Your desire is already understood. Your pain is already held in a space you cannot physically reach. And even before words leave your lips, the intention of your heart is fully exposed and completely known. This means you have never spoken into emptiness. Not once. But here is what makes this truth even more powerful. Just because something has been heard does not mean it is immediately revealed. There is a difference between divine reception and divine manifestation. One happens instantly. The other unfolds in timing, aligned with transformation. So when you feel like nothing is happening, it is not because you were ignored. It is because what has already been set in motion is still moving through layers you cannot yet see. And this leads to a question that will challenge everything you thought about waiting. Because if your prayer has already been heard, then what is really happening in the silence you are experiencing right now? There is a kind of prayer that never becomes words. It is formed in the deepest layers of the heart, where language stops being enough and only emotion remains. This is where most people live their most honest moments with God, not in spoken sentences, but in silent collapse. In thoughts too heavy to articulate, in feelings too complex to organize. You may think that's because you did not say it clearly, it was not heard. But what you feel internally is often more precise than anything you could ever express out loud. The human soul communicates in a language that does not depend on vocabulary. It depends on truth, and truth is always understood. There are nights when you lie awake and your mind repeats the same pain in different forms. You are not even praying in a structured way anymore. You are just existing inside the emotion of what you cannot fix. And even there, something profound is happening. Those moments are not empty. They are not forgotten. They are not spiritually silent. They are active. Because every unspoken prayer carries intensity. And intensity is never lost in the spiritual realm. It becomes movement. It becomes alignment. It becomes a form of communication that does not require clarity, only sincerity. And this is where something unexpected begins to reveal itself. The moments you thought were confusion may have been the most honest prayers you have ever lived. Not because they were organized, but because they were real. And now the question deepens. If even what you never managed to say is already known, what if your silence has been more powerful than your speech all along? There is a point in every spiritual journey where silence stops feeling neutral and starts feeling personal. It is no longer just the absence of answers. It begins to feel like distance, like something has changed, like heaven has stepped back. But what if silence is not absence at all? What if silence is a language you have not yet learned to interpret? Most people assume that divine communication must always feel like movement, clarity, or immediate response. Yet some of the deepest transformations in a human life happen precisely when nothing seems to be happening externally. In those periods, something far more subtle is unfolding beneath perception. Silence is not empty. It is layered. It is where correction happens without noise. It is where direction is formed without explanation. It is where your inner world is being adjusted so that what you're asking for does not destroy you when it arrives. And this is where confusion often enters, because the human mind equates silence with rejection. But spiritually, silence can also mean refinement. It can mean preparation. It can mean that what you asked for is being shaped in a form that your current state could not yet sustain. There is a depth to divine silence that only reveals itself in hindsight. When you look back, you begin to realize that the moments you felt most abandoned were often the moments where something within you was being rebuilt in ways you did not notice. And now something shifts again. Because if silence is not rejection, then it is communication. And if it is communication, then the question is no longer whether God is speaking, but whether you're ready to understand how He is speaking to you right now. There are prayers you forgot you prayed. Words spoken in desperation, whispered in fear, or even thought for a single second before life moved on. You may have left those moments behind, believing they lost their meaning over time. But in the spiritual dimension, nothing sincere disappears just because time passes. Some prayers do not expire. They remain active in a timeline that does not follow human clocks. What you once released in emotion continues to exist in a form you cannot perceive. Still moving, still unfolding, still interacting with your life in ways you have not connected yet. This changes everything about how you understand your past, because it means you are not only living the consequences of recent prayers, but also the echo of older ones you no longer remember. The version of you who cried in another season is still connected to what you're experiencing now. And sometimes, what you are waiting for today is not only tied to what you asked for yesterday, but also to what you surrendered years ago in a moment of deep vulnerability. This is why certain answers feel delayed beyond logic. It is not always about time passing forward. It is about layers of intention converging at the right moment of alignment. And this leads to a profound realization. You are not starting from zero in your prayers. You are continuing a conversation that's been unfolding across your entire life, even in the parts you thought were already over. Now the question becomes even more intimate. If your past prayers are still alive, then how much of your present life is already connected to moments you have forgotten? There is a struggle that every heart of faith eventually faces. The feeling that what was asked for is taking too long. the perception that heaven is moving slower than life requires. And in that space between expectation and reality, doubt quietly grows. But what if the delay you feel is not delay at all? What if it is simply time not yet aligning with what has already been set in motion? Human beings experience time as a straight line. One moment follows another, and everything is measured by waiting, progress, and arrival. But spiritual reality does not operate under the same structure. What feels like waiting may actually be unfolding just outside of your perception. There are things that cannot arrive early without breaking you. There are answers that would destroy their own purpose if they appeared before you were ready to carry them. And there are blessings that require internal preparation before external manifestation becomes safe. So what you interpret as delay may actually be protection disguised as time. This is where the heart begins to wrestle with trust. Because it is easy to believe when everything moves quickly. It is harder when nothing seems to change. Yet faith is not tested in acceleration. It is tested in stillness. And in that stillness, something important is happening. Not absence, not abandonment, but alignment beyond what you can measure. Now, the deeper question arises. If time is not delaying your answers, but shaping you for them, then what part of your life is being prepared right now without your awareness? There is a place beyond human perception where emotion is not wasted and pain is not ignored. Every tear that falls carries information. Every moment of emotional breaking carries weight. And in a dimension you cannot see, nothing sincere is ever meaningless. What you experience as suffering is often transformed into something you do not immediately recognize. Not punishment, not neglect, but redirection shaped through experience you did not choose, yet somehow are being formed by. There are seasons where life feels like it is pulling you apart internally, but in reality, something is being rearranged within you. Your tears are not just expressions of sadness. They are signals. They reveal where attachment is breaking, where dependence is shifting, where identity is being refined. And in that unseen field, those signals are not lost. They are interpreted in a way your conscious mind cannot access. What feels like emotional collapse may actually be directional correction. This is why some paths close without explanation. Not because you are being stopped, but because you are being repositioned. Not every closed door is rejection. Some are protection before exposure to something you were not yet equipped to walk through. And slowly, if you look back with time, you begin to realize that even your most painful moments were not random. They were shaping you toward directions you would never have chosen willingly, but may one day understand deeply. Now something more subtle begins to emerge. If even your tears are being translated into direction, then nothing about your emotional life is invisible to the process that is shaping your path. There is a shift in understanding that changes everything about how prayer is experienced. Most people treat prayer as words directed outward, as if they must be carefully formed, repeated, and delivered in order to reach something beyond them. But there is a deeper reality that operates beneath language. Prayer is not only communication, it is resonance. It is the frequency of your inner state aligning with something far greater than your immediate perception. This means that what matters most is not only what you say, but what you are while you say it. Your fear, your trust, your surrender, your resistance. All of it creates a spiritual signal that carries far beyond words. This is why two people can say the same prayer and experience entirely different outcomes internally. One is speaking from desperation alone. The other is speaking from a place of surrender that does not yet require evidence to believe. And this changes the meaning of waiting. Because when prayer is understood as frequency, waiting is no longer emptiness, it becomes calibration, a subtle adjustment of who you are, so that what you are asking for does not arrive into a version of you that cannot sustain it. This is also why some prayers seem unanswered, when in reality the response is already interacting with a version of you that is still forming, not denied, but synchronized with your becoming. And now the awareness deepens even further. If prayer is a frequency rather than a request, then every moment of your inner state is already part of the conversation you are having with the divine right now. There are moments when something or someone leaves your life, and the immediate reaction is confusion, pain, or even a sense of spiritual contradiction. You prayed for stability, yet things shifted. You prayed for clarity, yet something was taken away. And in that tension, it becomes difficult to understand how loss could be connected to divine response. But not every answer arrives as addition. Some answers arrive as removal. There are things that remain in your life simply because you have become accustomed to them, not because they are aligned with where you are meant to go next. And sometimes what feels like loss is actually the beginning of protection you did not recognize in real time. This is where understanding deepens, because if prayer is alignment, then answers are not always about giving you what you want, but guiding you toward what sustains your spiritual growth. And that process often requires separation from what no longer fits your next stage of becoming. What makes this difficult is that the human heart attaches meaning to presence. So when something disappears, it feels like absence of care. Yet from another perspective, it can be the precise opposite. It can be guidance expressed through redirection, even when it hurts. And over time, clarity begins to emerge. You start to see that certain endings were not accidents. They were necessary shifts that created space for something you could not have received otherwise. Now a deeper question begins to form within you. If removal can be an answer, then how many things you once resisted losing were actually shaping your protection without you knowing it? There is a threshold in every human journey where strength runs out, where faith feels thin, and where continuing forward no longer makes logical sense. It is the moment when giving up stops being an idea and becomes a real emotional option. And strangely, it is often in that exact moment that something shifts, not always visibly, not always dramatically, but deeply enough to change the direction of what was about to collapse. There are experiences in life that feel like they are reaching their final point, where everything suggests an ending is near. Yet something interrupts the finality of that conclusion. A delay appears. A thought changes. A circumstance adjusts. A path that seems closed suddenly does not fully close. And from a spiritual perspective, these moments are not coincidence. They are intersections between human limitation and something greater that operates beyond awareness. What you interpret as barely making it through may, in truth, be unseen intervention operating at the edge of your endurance. Because there are moments when you are not sustained by your own strength anymore, but by something holding the structure of your life together in ways you cannot detect. This is also where reflection becomes powerful. Looking back, you begin to notice that some of your lowest points did not lead to endings, but to unexpected continuation. And that continuation often carried you into directions you never planned, yet somehow needed. Now the awareness becomes more personal. If you did not give up when everything inside you was ready to stop, then what unseen force has been silently sustaining your path during your most fragile moments? There is a stage in the spiritual journey that feels like inactivity. No clear movement, no visible progress, no confirmation that anything is changing. It is the kind of season where life continues externally, but internally everything feels suspended. And this is where perception becomes misleading, because what feels like nothing is happening is often the most active phase of transformation. Waiting is not a void. It is a process of formation that does not announce itself while it is happening. The human mind tends to measure growth through visible results, but inner development rarely follows that logic. Some of the most important changes occur in silence, where nothing external validates what is being rebuilt within. In these periods, your responses to life begin to shift in subtle ways. Your emotional reactions start to soften. Your attachment to control begins to loosen. Your perspective starts to widen, even without dramatic events to explain it. And yet, because nothing obvious is changing, it is easy to assume that nothing is happening at all. But spiritually, waiting is never empty. It is often where depth is formed, where endurance is strengthened, where perception is recalibrated so that what comes next does not overwhelm you. This is why certain answers do not arrive immediately, not because they are absent, but because you are being prepared to carry them without breaking under their weight. And now a deeper realization begins to surface. If waiting is actually formation, then the silence you are experiencing is not holding you back. It is shaping the version of you that will eventually recognize what you have been asking for all along. There is a conversation happening within you that most people never learn to name. It is not spoken out loud, yet it is constant. It is the presence of faith and doubt existing in the same space, competing for interpretation of everything you experience. One voice says to trust, the other demands proof. One voice believes something is unfolding, the other insists nothing is changing, and neither of them fully disappears. This internal tension is not a sign of spiritual failure. It is actually part of the structure of growth, because faith that never encounters doubt is not tested, and doubt that never meets faith becomes conclusion instead of question. But when both exist together, something more complex begins to form inside you. You begin to learn how to move forward without complete certainty. You begin to trust even when understanding is incomplete. You begin to hold tension without collapsing into it. And in that space, something subtle happens. Your relationship with belief stops being automatic and starts becoming conscious. You are no longer just reacting emotionally to life. You are observing your inner responses and choosing where to place your trust. This is where spiritual maturity quietly begins to emerge. Not in the absence of doubt, but in the ability to continue seeking meaning even while doubt still speaks. And now the reflection deepens further. If faith and doubt are both present within you, then the real question is not which one exists, but which one is shaping the direction of your life right now. There are experiences in life that go beyond explanation. Moments when what you feel inside cannot be translated into words that make sense to others, or even to yourself. It is not confusion alone. It is depth that language cannot fully carry. And in those moments, something important happens that most people overlook. Your pain begins to speak in a language that does not require articulation. It is not that God needs your pain to be explained. It is that What you feel, in its purest form, already carries meaning beyond expression. Every emotion that rises without structure, every silent breakdown, every internal weight that cannot be organized into prayer, still communicates with absolute clarity in the spiritual dimension. This changes the way suffering is understood, because pain is no longer just something to endure or escape. It becomes something that is already being recognized at a level deeper than awareness. There are moments when you're not even able to pray properly. The simplies exist inside what hurts. Yet even there, nothing is disconnected. The absence of words does not create absence of connection. It only reveals a different form of it. And slowly, a realization begins to form. What you could not say has never been a barrier. It has been part of a conversation that does not depend on human structure to exist. Now the awareness becomes even more intimate. If your pain is already understood beyond language, then what you have been carrying silently has never been invisible to the presence that has been with you all along. There is a subtle danger in how the human heart defines answers. Most people expect responses to arrive in recognizable forms, shaped according to their anticipation, timing, and emotional preference. When reality does not match that expectation, it is easy to assume nothing has happened. But divine response is not limited to human interpretation. There are answers that arrive disguised as interruptions, as redirections, as delays that later reveal their purpose only in hindsight. There are responses that do not confirm what you wanted, but instead protect what you could not yet understand. This is where perception begins to expand, because what you call unanswered prayer may actually be a response that does not resemble your expectation of resolution. The outcome you imagined is not always the outcome that preserves your path, your growth, or your inner stability. And so, life begins to shift in ways that only later reveal their meaning. What was closed becomes clarity. What was denied becomes direction. What was postponed becomes preparation. In this space, learning to recognize different forms of response becomes essential. Otherwise, you risk mistaking divine guidance for absence, simply because it does not arrive in the shape you predicted. And now, a deeper question emerges within this awareness. If answers can take forms you do not recognize immediately, then how many moments in your life have already been responses you misunderstood at the time? There is a stage in the spiritual journey that feels almost empty from the inside. Not because life has stopped, but because emotional energy no longer responds the way it used to. What once felt intense, urgent, and deeply charged begins to feel distant, quiet, almost neutral. And in that neutrality, something unexpected happens. Faith is no longer carried by feeling. It begins to stand on its own. This is where many people misinterpret their condition. They assume that because they no longer feel the same emotional fire, something has been lost. But in reality, something is being refined. Emotion is no longer the foundation. Understanding is beginning to take its place. There is a difference between believing because you feel something and believing because you have chosen to remain aligned with what you know to be true. Even when feeling is absent, this shift is not a loss of spirituality. It is a deepening of it, because emotional waves can rise and fall, but something rooted beyond emotion becomes steadier over time. It does not depend on confirmation. It does not collapse when silence continues. It simply remains. And this is where a quiet strength begins to form inside you. Not the strength that reacts, but the strength that endures without needing constant reassurance. Now a more personal reflection begins to surface. If your faith can remain even when your emotions no longer support it, then what part of you has already moved beyond what you thought was necessary to keep going? There is a type of realization that does not arrive suddenly, but unfolds slowly through reflection. It begins when you look back at your life and start noticing patterns that were invisible while you were living them. Connections between moments that once felt random, delays that now appear intentional, closings that now seem purposeful. And in that awareness, a deeper question begins to form. Was any of this truly accidental? There is a perspective in which your path was never disorganized, even when it felt chaotic. Every direction you took, every interruption you resisted, every silence you struggled through may have been part of a structure you could not see at the time. Not because your choices were irrelevant, but because your understanding of the whole picture was incomplete. This does not remove your agency. It expands your perception of meaning. Because what once felt like confusion begins to look like formation. What once felt like delay begins to look like orchestration. What once felt like detours begin to look like necessary passages through experiences that shaped who you are becoming. And slowly, a quiet shift happens inside you. The need to interpret everything in real time begins to soften. You start to trust that meaning does not always appear in the moment it is needed, but reveals itself when you are capable of seeing it. Now the reflection reaches a deeper point. If your life has been unfolding with a hidden coherence beyond your awareness, then what you call uncertainty may have never been chaos at all, but a path already understood from a perspective you are only beginning to touch. There comes a moment when perception shifts so deeply that you no longer look at your past through the lens of regret or confusion. Instead, you begin to sense that even the parts of your life you once wished to erase had a role in shaping something within you that could not have been formed any other way. What once felt like loss begins to resemble preparation. What once felt like delay begins to resemble timing. What once felt like breaking begins to resemble rebuilding. This does not mean every experience was easy or desired. It means that within the complexity of your journey, nothing was truly without influence. Every moment you survived contributed to the structure of your inner strength, even when you're not aware of it happening. There is a quiet spiritual principle revealed in hindsight. Growth rarely announces itself while it is occurring. It is only when you look back that you begin to see how certain moments stretched you, refined you, and reshaped the way you respond to life. And in that realization, something powerful settles inside you. The need to reject parts of your story begins to fade, not because everything makes sense now, but because you start to recognize that meaning was being formed even in what felt meaningless at the time. Now a final awareness begins to surface. If nothing in your journey was truly wasted, then your life has been moving towards something greater than your understanding. Even in the moments when you believed you were standing still. There is a point in the spiritual journey where understanding becomes less about seeking answers and more about recognizing presence. Not the presence that always feels visible or emotionally intense, but the kind that remains steady even when everything else feels uncertain. It is a realization that arrives quietly, often after many layers of reflection. You begin to see that even in your most confused moments, there was a continuity holding your path together in ways you could not perceive at the time. This does not erase the challenges you faced. It reframes them. Because what once felt like isolation begins to take on a different meaning. The silence you interpreted as distance begins to resemble stability you did not recognize while living through it. The uncertainty that once created fear begins to feel like a process that was never disconnected from guidance. And slowly, a deeper awareness settles in. You are not navigating life in abandonment. You are moving through stages of experience that were shaping your perception, your resilience, and your understanding in ways that only become visible when you pause long enough to look back. There is a profound shift that happens here. The need for constant external confirmation begins to weaken. Trust is no longer dependent on immediate clarity. It becomes something internal, rooted in recognition rather than reaction. And now everything converges into a final realization. If you were never truly alone in any part of your journey, then every step you took, even the most uncertain ones, was already part of a presence that never left you, even when you thought it had. End of journey. Concluding awakening. The moment you realize you were always being carried by a love you could not measure. There is a final turning point in this inner journey where everything simplifies. Not because life becomes easier, but because perception becomes clearer. You stop trying to decode every moment as separate fragments and begin to sense a deeper continuity behind it all. What once felt like randomness begins to feel like guidance you were not able to recognize while it was happening. What once felt like silence begins to feel like a form of presence that does not rely on noise to exist. What once felt like distance begins to feel like a space that was never empty, only misunderstood. And in this quiet clarity, something profound settles within you. You realize that the strength you thought you had to find on your own was being sustained in ways you did not perceive. Not through constant emotional confirmation, but through an underlying support that remained even when everything else felt unstable. This does not change the reality of what you went through. It changes the meaning you assign to it. Because the same journey that once felt overwhelming now reveals a hidden coherence, as if every step was part of a larger unfolding that was never interrupted, even in your moments of doubt. And here is where everything gently converges, not into answers for every question, but into a deeper recognition that you were never abandoned in your path, even when you believed you were walking it alone. What remains is not explanation, but awareness, a quiet certainty that your life has been held by something greater than your ability to fully understand, guiding you not through perfection, but through presence that never let you go. The gentle return to life after spiritual awakening. There is something that happens after deep realization that few people talk about. It is not an explosion of emotion, nor a sudden change in external reality. It is quieter than that. It is the return to everyday life, but with a different inner posture. You still face challenges. You still encounter uncertainty. You still move through situations that do not always make immediate sense. But something within you no longer reacts the same way. There is a new stillness that begins to accompany you. It is not detachment from life. It is presence without collapse. And in this state, prayer also begins to change. It is no longer only a cry from desperation or a search for answers in urgency. It becomes a steady conversation, a quiet alignment that does not depend on intensity to be real. You start to notice that clarity does not always come as a moment of revelation, but as a gradual understanding that settles over time. What once disturbed you deeply may still appear, but it no longer defines your inner state in the same way. And this is where spiritual maturity reveals itself most clearly. not in the absence of struggle, but in the transformation of how struggle is experienced within you. You begin to realize that peace was never the absence of problems. It was the presence of something deeper within you that remained even when everything around you was uncertain. And slowly, life becomes less about searching for constant signs and more about recognizing that awareness itself has changed. You are no longer only asking where God is in your story. You begin to sense that you have been learning how to perceive what was always there. And as this understanding settles, something simple but profound remains. Not every answer needs to arrive for you to continue walking. Not every question needs closure for you to keep trusting. Because what has been forming within you is not dependent on external confirmation anymore. It is a quiet knowing, a steady awareness, a sense that your path is still unfolding, and that you are not walking it without guidance, even when it feels ordinary. And in this final reflection, everything softens into one truth that does not need explanation to be felt. Your journey was never only about what you were trying to reach. It was also about what you were becoming along the way.